I should have known moving into an HOA neighborhood was a mistake. But the house was perfect. Quiet cul-de-sac, big backyard, and a front porch that begged for lazy afternoons with a beer in hand. It wasn't until my second day that I realized I had unknowingly walked into enemy territory. The enemy? A woman named Karen. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely she wasn't that bad. But trust me, this wasn't just any Karen. She was the final boss of Karens. Mid-50s, the type who wore pastel sweaters no matter the weather and clutched a clipboard like it was a medieval scepter. I spotted her marching toward me the morning after I moved in, and my gut told me she wasn't coming to offer me a welcome basket. "Excuse me," she barked before I could pretend I hadn't seen her. I turned, putting on my best I'm a polite new neighbor smile. "Good morning." Karen was already frowning. "I'm the head of the HOA, and we have rules in this community. I assume you've read them." I skimmed through them," I lied. I hadn't. The stack of HOA papers was currently serving as a very effective paperweight on my kitchen counter. Her eyes narrowed. "Well, then let me educate you. Your garbage cans need to be put away immediately after pickup. Your grass should never be above 2 inches. And no vehicles parked on the street overnight." I blinked. "That's a lot." She crossed her arms. "If you can't follow the rules, you'll start racking up fines. We like to keep our neighborhood looking respectable." At that moment, I noticed something strange. Her eyes darted upward, scanning the treetops. It was brief, but enough for me to file away in my brain for later. "Well, thanks for the heads up," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll keep that in mind." Karen wasn't satisfied. She lingered for a second, as if expecting me to grovel in gratitude. When I didn't, she gave a tight-lipped smile and walked away. I should have left it at that. Should have brushed it off as an overly strict neighbor and gone about my life. But Karen didn't give me that option. By the end of my first week, I had received 3 HOA violations. Day 3, a notice for improper trash placement. My garbage can had been 4 inches outside the designated area. Day 5, a warning about overgrown vegetation. The grass had barely grown since I moved in. Day 7, a fine for unauthorized decorations. What was the heinous offense? A garden gnome on my porch. The worst part? She didn't just issue these violations, she delivered them personally. Like a smug postal worker of doom, she'd waltz up to my door, clipboard in hand, and slap a notice onto my mailbox with all the enthusiasm of a parking meter attendant. "You'll need to remove that by tomorrow," she chirped, pointing at my harmless little gnome. "Really? A gnome?" I asked, folding my arms. "What's wrong with it?" "It's not in line with the community aesthetic," she said, as if I had erected a neon casino sign in my front yard. I stared at her. "But Jim down the street has a flamingo." Karen's eye twitched. "Jim's been grandfathered in." I could feel my patience draining. "Fine, I'll take it down." She smiled like she'd won a battle. But I knew right then, this was war. The next few weeks became a nightmare of passive-aggressive warfare. I'd wake up to find fresh notices on my door, each one pettier than the last. One day, I got a $50 fine for excessive wind chimes. I had one. Another time, she accused me of having a non-compliant mailbox because it was a shade too dark. She even had the audacity to peek over my fence one afternoon while I was grilling. That barbecue. I cut her off. "Let me guess. Not in line with community aesthetics?" She huffed. "You must get HOA approval for permanent outdoor fixtures. It's a grill. It's on the patio." At this point, I realized Karen wasn't just a rule enforcer. She was a dictator. And I wasn't the only victim. At a neighborhood meeting, which I was strongly encouraged to attend, I noticed the tension in the room. Karen stood at the front, rattling off new regulations while people sat in grim silence. When she mentioned a new mandatory flower color for front yards, neutral tones only, no reds, oranges, or purples, an older man in the back muttered, "This is getting ridiculous." I caught his eye as I left, and he gave me a nod. There was an unspoken understanding between us. Karen had ruled for too long. It was around this time that fate handed me a golden opportunity. One evening, while watering my lawn, I heard a scream from Karen's house. Not the "I stubbed my toe" kind of scream, but the "I've just seen a ghost" variety. I turned to see her bolting inside, arms flailing. Curious, I wandered closer and saw what had spooked her. A single crow, sitting on her mailbox. Huh. The next morning, I watched from my window as Karen cautiously peeked outside. The coast was clear, but she still hurried to her car like she was expecting an ambush. That's when it clicked. Karen was afraid of crows. And, just like that, the universe gifted me the perfect revenge. I grinned, sipping my coffee. Time to bring out the drone. I had never been a morning person, but for the next few weeks, I woke up extra early. The mission was simple: make Karen's life a Hitchcockian nightmare. Back in college, I used to mess around with a drone, a solid little quadcopter that I mostly used for filming scenic shots and, on occasion, delivering burritos to my lazy roommate. It had been gathering dust in my garage for years, but after a quick tune-up and battery charge, it was ready for action. And so was I. Step one of my master plan was understanding what lured crows in the first place. A little research and a few YouTube rabbit holes revealed that crows love peanuts. Unsalted, in-shell peanuts. Easy enough. The next morning, while the neighborhood was still deep in slumber, I carefully loaded a small bag of peanuts onto my drone. I launched it from my backyard, watching as it hummed quietly into the sky. I guided it over Karen's house, checking the onboard camera. Target acquired. A tap on my controller, and the drone released its cargo, tiny peanut bombs raining down onto her roof. The mission took less than a minute. I brought the drone back, landed it smoothly, and casually strolled to my front porch with a fresh cup of coffee. Then I waited. At first, nothing happened. I almost thought it wouldn't work. But then, just as I was about to head inside, I heard them. The crows came. A few at first, fluttering down to investigate the unexpected breakfast buffet. Then more arrived. By the time Karen stepped outside, there were at least a dozen pecking around her porch and yard, hopping onto the railings, cawing loudly. I will never forget her reaction. The second she saw them, she let out a strangled scream and sprinted back inside so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. I took a slow, satisfied sip of my coffee. This was going to be fun. The next morning, I did it again. And the next. Each time, the crows learned faster. They started waiting. By the fourth day, I swear they had begun associating Karen's house with food. Even before I dropped the peanuts, I spotted them perched on her roof, staring at her windows like a feathery death squad. Karen, meanwhile, was losing it. She started leaving for work earlier, sprinting to her car as if she were dodging enemy fire. One morning, I saw her emerge from the house holding a broom, wildly swinging at the birds like some deranged wizard trying to cast "Begone, foul beasts." The crows, of course, were not impressed. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. By week 2, the entire street had started to notice. People whispered. Neighbors stood on their porches, watching Karen's daily struggles with equal parts confusion and amusement. One morning, as I accidentally watered my lawn while watching the show, old man Frank, the grizzled veteran who lived 2 houses down, strolled over. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, arms crossed, watching as Karen made yet another panicked retreat back inside her house. Then, without looking at me, he muttered, "Damn shame what's happening to her." I kept my face neutral. Yeah, real mystery. Frank side-eyed me. "You know, I used to do recon back in the day." I took a sip of coffee. "That's so?" Frank nodded, then gestured vaguely toward my garage. "Bet you got yourself a nice little bird's-eye view from in there." I froze. Had he seen the drone? For a moment, we just stood there. Then, very slowly, Frank turned toward me, expression unreadable. And then, he grinned, didn't say another word, just gave me a single approving nod and walked away. I let out a breath. Frank knew, and he wasn't saying a damn thing. By week 3, Karen had officially gone into full meltdown mode. She started calling pest control, who, to her horror, told her that crows weren't really pests in the traditional sense. They couldn't remove them. I watched from my window as she begged them for solutions. The guy shrugged and suggested she stop feeding them. Oh, Karen, if only you knew. By week 4, I knew she was on the edge. The once pristine queen of the HOA had become a paranoid wreck. She would peer out of her blinds before stepping outside, flinch at every bird noise. And, most satisfying of all, she had started talking to herself. Then, one evening, as I was casually grilling on my porch, I saw the sign I had been waiting for. A for sale sign went up in Karen's yard. I nearly dropped my beer. Was this real? I needed to be sure. I casually wandered over to Frank's house. He was already outside, watching the sign go up with deep satisfaction. "Looks like she's moving," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Frank smirked. "Ain't that a damn shame?" I grinned. "Sure is." We clinked beers in silent victory. The moment that for sale sign went up, the neighborhood felt lighter. People who used to avoid eye contact with Karen now walked past her house with renewed enthusiasm, like prisoners realizing their warden was about to be transferred. Of course, Karen wasn't going to go down without a fight. Over the next week, she tried everything to get rid of the crows. She bought fake owls, the kind you put on your roof to scare birds away. The crows? They laughed in her face. One even sat on top of the owl, like a feathered middle finger to her efforts. She played loud noises from her phone, some kind of anti-bird frequency. The crows flapped away for a few minutes, then came right back. She even tried throwing rocks. Now, let me tell you something about crows. They remember faces. And Karen? She had just made enemies for life. By the next morning, they were waiting for her. Not just at her house. Oh no. They started following her down the street. The woman was officially cursed. By the time the first potential buyers showed up, Karen was at her breaking point. I wasn't about to let her leave too easily. The first open house sign popped up on a Saturday. I figured I'd take one last mission with the drone, just a little farewell gift. I made sure to wake up extra early, loaded up the drone with a double dose of peanuts, sent it up, and let it rain. By the time the first couple showed up, the crows were in full force. I stood at my window, sipping coffee, watching as the buyers stepped out of their car and immediately froze. Karen came rushing out, trying to act like everything was normal. It wasn't. "Don't mind them. They're just birds," she said, laughing a little too high-pitched. At that exact moment, a crow swooped down, grabbed a peanut, and then pooped directly onto her shoulder. The buyers noped out so fast that I'm pretty sure they left tire marks on the pavement. Karen stood there, trembling, covered in bird crap, her eye twitching uncontrollably. I casually stepped outside, stretched, and said, "Tough break." She glared at me. Did she suspect something? Maybe. But at this point, Karen was so far gone that she probably thought the universe itself had turned against her. Which, to be fair, it kind of had. The next 2 weeks were a repeat performance. Every time a new buyer showed up, the crows descended. Every time Karen tried to act normal, something went wrong. By the end of week 6, the house had been on the market for over a month with 0 offers. And then, one morning, as I was watering my lawn, I saw something beautiful. A moving truck. Karen was leaving. For good. I watched as she stormed in and out of the house, shoving boxes into her car. Her movements were erratic, her face pale from exhaustion. The once mighty HOA queen now looked like a woman who had spent the last month fighting off a biblical plague. She slammed her car door shut, took one last look at the neighborhood, and then peeled out of the driveway without a single goodbye. The reign of terror was over. I leaned on my fence, feeling the morning sun on my face, and took a long, satisfied sip of coffee. Then, from the house next door, Frank stepped outside. He looked at the empty house, looked at me, and then, with a small grin, he said, "That's a damn fine morning." I just nodded. Yeah, it was. The moment Karen's car disappeared down the street, the neighborhood erupted, not in a literal, fireworks in the sky way, but in something much better. A deep, collective sigh of relief. Lawns were mowed at a leisurely pace. People let their garbage cans linger an extra hour after pickup, just because they could. Jim, the guy with the flamingo army in his yard, immediately added 3 more birds to his collection. It was freedom. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Because by the end of the day, at least 5 different people had casually walked past my house and said the same thing. "Hey man, you coming to the barbecue?" Barbecue? What barbecue? That evening, Frank strolled over, beer in hand. He didn't even ask if I was coming. He just jerked his thumb toward Jim's house and said, "Come on." I followed him across the street, where half the neighborhood was gathered around a massive grill. The second I stepped into the yard, I got a round of cheers. I blinked. "Oh, what's this?" Jim grinned. "Celebration." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" A woman from down the street laughed. "For her being gone." There were actual toasts. Someone brought out a Karen piñata, which was a little disturbing but also kind of hilarious. And then, halfway through my second beer, Frank finally dropped the bomb. I had just taken a bite of a burger when Frank leaned over and said, "We know it was you." I choked. Jim clapped me on the back, laughing. "Oh, don't play dumb, man. Frank saw you." I wiped my mouth. "Saw me what?" Frank smirked. "The drone." I went still. I looked around. Nobody seemed mad. Nobody looked like they were about to call the cops or hand me an HOA violation from the ghost of Karen past. In fact, they looked grateful. Jim grinned. "Dude, we were just waiting for her to crack." The woman from earlier, Anna, I think, laughed. "You sped up the process." Frank raised his beer. "You did what we were all too afraid to do." And then, to my absolute shock, the entire group lifted their drinks in my direction. "To the Crow Master," Jim declared. I groaned. "Oh, come on." But the name stuck. By the end of the night, I was stuffed, slightly buzzed, and thoroughly amused at the fact that I had somehow become a neighborhood legend. Karen was gone. The HOA? Still there, technically, but with a lot less power now that their fearless leader had fled. And me? I finally had the peaceful, suburban life I'd wanted. No clipboard warriors. No ridiculous fines. Just me, my porch, and my morning coffee. Well, me, my porch, my coffee, and the occasional crow still lurking around Karen's old house, waiting for their morning peanuts. I smirked. Some habits die hard. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.